Bueno, hola, buenos días. Good morning, everybody. Final day of Greach, but I hope everybody's had a great time and enjoyed the content and the material. In this keynote, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the new novelties and things that we're working on to improve the features and functionality of Grails 3 available to your teams. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Graeme Rocher. I am the project lead of Grails at OCI. We have a booth downstairs. I'm sure you've all seen it by now. But yeah, come and chat to us whenever you want. On the agenda for this talk, though, is we're going to do a Grails 3 general status update. I'll talk a little bit about what's new in Grails 3, just a brief recap. And then I'm going to talk about what's coming in Grails 3.3 and do some demos, and we can have questions at the end. Hopefully, if I have time, I'll try and be more efficient than yesterday's GORM talk. But in terms of Grails 3, we've been hard at work on the 3.2 line. Grails 3.2.8 is the latest stable release, which we released last week. And we also did some patch releases last week. The venerable 2.5 Grails 2 got a release with 2.5.6, and we did 3.1.16 as well. So we keep providing updates on that side. In terms of other activities that are going on, I imagine many of you have seen this already, but just to point it out again, we have been, the whole team has been really hard at work improving our web presence in terms of learning resources, which is crucial for the growth of the framework and teaching people and showing people how to use features and best practices and all that sort of thing. So we have a new guides section, which is at guides.grails.org. I think we have like 26 different unique guides. Some of them are quick casts, but many of them are guides with sample applications and tutorials and everything, and we're doing a new one every Monday. You know, Sergio is the man behind that process. So every Monday we release a new guide, and we've provided like some organization into sections, and the most recent guide we did was on Neo4j, and we'll do more guides on topics around GORM in particular in the coming months. So we're super excited about that. Check it out, guides.grails.org. So just a recap on what's new in Grails 3.2, which I think we released last year, was September, initial GA version. So it was an advancement on Grails 3.1. Well, we had improvements to the JSON views features, which we introduced in Grails 3.1, the latest version of GORM 6, and we provided profiles for AngularJS 1, Angular 2, and above, and React refinement to the REST support, things like CORS support, and RxJava support. So it was a pretty significant release. The profiles area in particular, we're excited about, and it's continuing to develop, making it easier for you to create and get started with your applications. And one of the things we've done is the whole profile mechanism is kind of independent of Grails itself. So we were able to wrap that API in a web application and publish it at start.grails.org. So you can go to start.grails.org and you can select your project type and your name and the features you're interested in and the profile you want to use, whether you're going to be building a React app or an Angular 2 app or whatever. You click the generate button and you get a zip file sent down to you with the project setup. Really handy for demos. And as long as in addition to the web interface, we have a curl interface. So if you're using terminal, you can type curl and a particular URL. And in fact, if you go to start.grails.org, actually I didn't have space on the slide here, but it'll show you the curl command that you can write to get your application up and running. And it works nicely with with another feature in Grails 3.2 that we introduced, which was Grails W. So with Grails W and this together, you actually don't need Grails installed itself. Of course, that's pretty ridiculously easy nowadays with things like SDK, man. But still, it's convenient for CIs and whatever else that you can automate a whole bunch of stuff through the start.grails.org with the Grails W wrapper on the command line and so forth. All very convenient and handy. So just to recap on JSON views, we noticed when building Grails 2's APIs on run JSON that people ended up putting a whole bunch of logic on run marshalling and in different places in their Grails 2 apps, and it kind of broke the whole MVC structure of how you should structure an application's design with your model, your controller, and your view. So we're trying to encourage people to move away from defining JSON marshalers or using the render method to render JSON directly within the controller, to restore the V in MVC, right? To make it so that you put your view logic in the right place, which is in the view. So in the case of JSON responses, we didn't really have a solution. I mean, you could use GSP and write JSON inside your GSP, but it wasn't a natural fit because GSP is designed around markup in XML more than JSON, and so it made sense to come up with something new that was fast, performant. They're statically compiled, and they produce exactly what you expect. So you do JSON.person, and you get the resulting JSON, and you can pass a model from your controller. There's various utility methods and so forth, which make it easier to render objects and so forth. So very handy, and the direct equivalent to GSP for REST applications. So the website for JSON views is views.grails.org. There's a lot of features that is a whole talk by itself that I'm not going to go through. Pre-compilation for production that we do, for example, and template inheritance and HAL support and so forth. Check it out at that link. It's pretty cool stuff. And we recently just released, I think last week, a release candidate of JSON Views 1.2, which will be the default version for Grails 3.3, which is coming up soon. And this introduces support for the JSON API specification. So we had HAL support, but there's another specification for a standard format for JSON responses called JSON API. The link is JSONAPI.org if you want to read the spec. And there's a JSON API object which you can use and call render, and you can it will automatically produce the right response for you. It does things like pagination and so forth. So if you're interested in instead of using HAL as your standard format, or interested in using JSON API, that is now possible with the release candidate of JSON Views 1.2 that just came out. Let's talk a little bit about Angular. So in Grails 3.2 and 3.1, I think, was the initial version of Angular support where we had this profile. We introduced support for Angular 1 that extends the REST profile and adds basically set up for Angular 1 and Angular 1 JS1 scaffolding. The way you get going with that is to type those commands. Now there is some debate about the names of these profiles, which I'm not going to go into, but the important thing is what it adds in terms of profile-specific commands around integrating Angular with a Grails 3 application. So you can say create ng controller and it'll generate, so you get command line generation of Angular controllers, services, and so forth, as well as scaffolding to generate a whole application for you. So that's pretty cool. But as we did that, Angular 2 came out, as these things happen and things move forward and change and progress. And I think last week Angular 4 came out. So these things are non-stop. So I don't know what happened to 3, by the way. It's just out the window, whatever. Okay, so anyway, we had somebody saying to us, well, you know, you just released a new version of the Angular 2 profile, and now Angular 4 is out. I was like, oh, no, not again. Well, the good news is that Angular 4 is backwards compatible to Angular 2. So the debates around the naming of these profiles is actually this profile should be called just Angular, and the Angular 1.1 should be called AngularJS or something, or we should, you know, remove the numerical version from these. But the point is that this Angular 2 profile is AngularJS. Well, in fact, that's even wrong. It should be Angular 2 plus, because Angular is no longer called AngularJS. It's now just called Angular. So yeah, the whole situation stresses me out with the naming and the versioning and whatever. But anyway, we now have in beta, in release candidate form, Angular 2 and above. So no, it works with Angular 4 as well. Scaffolding plugin. Yeah. So this is new, and we have an Angular 2 profile where you can create an app, and it'll create a multi-project build where you have your client project, which is an Angular project, and your Grails server project, which is a REST API project, and it'll set it up all for you with Node and Gradle and everything, so you can run the app. You can run them independently as well, thanks to Webpack and things like that. Just with Node on the command line, you can run the client. And the scaffolding will generate, you know, what you imagine, the client-server logic. You have a domain class, click generate, boom, Angular 2 application, which is pretty great. So the Angular 2 plugin, like I said, we just did a release candidate, but again, probably for Grails 3.3, the Angular 2 profile itself will be updated to include the scaffolding feature, and it'll be all out of the box. So that's all progressing forward in terms of our JavaScript framework support around Angular, and I think it's an interesting area, and the tools are helping people get productive with these frameworks. Also, we have a React profile, which is pretty cool, and we have a really fantastic guide on the guides.grails.org for using the React profile. So if you really don't care about Angular and you prefer React, then you can use the React profile instead. And it does the same kind of thing where it will essentially set up a multi-project build with a Webpack, with a client project, server project being a Grails application, do all the necessary pieces to bind those together, and getting you productive with the two frameworks quickly and efficiently. So that's pretty cool. And then in terms of GORM 6, which we released with Grails 3.2, we had introduced a number of new features in GORM 6. RX GORM, which is a version of GORM that uses RX Java, GORM API, and it's stateless and so forth. And we used the RX GORM API to build MongoDB RX driver support, so you can build non-blocking applications using RX API. We also implemented another implementation for building REST clients called RX GORM for REST. We added an initial version for Neo4j 3 and the Bolt driver, and native multi-tenancy. So these are all new features that are part of GORM 6 in Grails 3.2. Like I said, regarding RX GORM, it is a non-blocking version of GORM. You know, the GORM API as it is today, the regular GORM API is fundamentally blocking. In fact, most object mapping systems are fundamentally blocking. Because if you imagine, for example, you load a book and you get a book from your database using an object mapper, and then you want to access the authors, and it's using lazy loading. When you access authors, you have to block to get the authors, right? So if you think about it, most object mapping tools are fundamentally blocking. As soon as you use lazy loading, you're blocking, yeah, which is pretty much any object mapping tool. So RxGORM is a rethink of how to build that kind of tool with a reactive system and RxJava. So for example, when you read a book from the database, in this case, you can do book.authors.subscribe and reactively load the association if you want to go, if you're using lazy loading. So that's pretty cool. It's stateless as well, so unlike normal GORM, where you have a session, it doesn't really make sense in a reactive model to have state. It's non-blocking, it's lightweight, you can spin it up in unit test. Currently, it's built on RxJava 1 because the MongoDB driver only supports RxJava 1. But as soon as they update that driver to support RxJava 2, then we'll be updating RxGORM as well. So that's one thing that's still on the to-do list. Okay, so that's just a brief recap of Grails 3.2. Now I'm going to talk about what's coming in Grails 3.3. So GORM 6.1 is a big theme of Grails 3.3, and it's actually already out. So if you're using Grails 3.2, you can already upgrade to GORM 6.1 and take advantage of the new features of GORM 6.1, which I'll be talking about and demoing more in a minute. But this is a side effect of the fact that we've now completely separated the projects. Previously, GORM releases were tied to Grails releases, and they were joined at the hip. GORM is now an independently evolving project, and releases will be independent going forward. We've added some features to Grails 3.2 to make it easier for you to switch GORM versions. So if you create a 3.2.8 application, for example, inside the Grails.properties file, there's a GORM version setting. And you just change the version and it'll do everything the right thing to make sure you're using the right version. So if you set GORM version equals 6.1 release, it'll configure GORM 6.1 for you without having to fiddle with your dependencies in build.gradle and so forth and go through all that effort. That's that new feature in Grails 3, the 3.2.x line, and it's an acknowledgement now that GORM releases are independent of Grails releases, and we will be doing GORM releases more frequently, or maybe less frequently, who knows, but completely independently of Grails releases. So just keep that in mind. We're also working on a new event bus abstraction. I'll talk about that a bit more. And we're also focusing on making Grails even more modular, reducing the size of the core part of Grails. So this is already happening. If you look at the master branch of Grails, you'll see that all the async stuff has been moved to another GitHub project called Grails Async. And again, I'll be talking about that more. The same thing is happening to the converters plugin, to GSP. We are moving parts of Grails outside or into independent subprojects so that we can apply the same policy as we do with GORM. You know, so if you're using Grails 3.2.8, there's a bug in GSP or something, you're using a certain version of GSP. Instead of waiting for a new Grails release, you just upgrade the version of GSP. You know, we have a plugin system for a reason, so I think it makes sense to take advantage of that. And it also really reduces the bloat of our distribution. The Grails 3.3 binary zip that you install from SDKman will be smaller, and also it lets you will let you build smaller applications. Not everybody needs async or GSP or converters. If you're using pure JSON views, maybe you don't want converters. So you can reduce the number of dependencies so that when you create your final production WAR or jar file or whatever it may be, it has less inside of it. So that's useful as well. We'll also be upgrading to Spring Boot 1.5.x. This is actually going to be the most challenging part of your upgrade when folks do upgrade to Grails 3.3, because Spring Boot 1.5.x deletes everything that they've deprecated. So there are some plugins out there that are still using deprecated Spring Boot classes, and most notably any of the servlet or filter registration beans for the servlet part. And those deprecated versions are gone, so it's very hard now to make a plugin that is compatible with all versions of Grails 3, because Grails 3.0 is using Spring Boot 1.2, which doesn't have the new class that replacement, and Grails 3.3 is using Spring Boot 1.5, which has deleted the old deprecated versions. So they've created a bit of a painful situation for the upgrade. So I don't know if we will release like another version of Grails Compat that restores those, so that we have some binary compatibility, or it'll be part of the upgrade guide that you have to update your plugins. But that's going to be the main upgrade challenge, just as a heads up, for 3.3. And then we'll go to Hibernate 5.2 as default, as the default version. We'll still support older versions of Hibernate, but just when you create a new app, 5.2 will be the default. Okay, so let's talk about GORM 6.1, which is the exciting part. So we've added common AST transformations around. So the @transactional, @rollback annotations, all of those have moved out of Grails into GORM, and they've been improved upon, so that they're completely usable independently of GORM itself. We've created some common services. So there are to explain this, there are some methods that are in GORM that are not specific to a domain class, but they're static methods. So things like with transaction, with new transaction, with session. All of those methods don't really make sense as to be in a domain class. So we have new interfaces one's called tenant service, one's called transaction service, and you can inject them into your classes and use transaction service with new transaction, or if you're going to do programmatic transactions, which you may not need. But and we've also massively improved unit testing with package scanning. I'm going to revisit data services in a moment. So it's really, really easy to unit test GORM now. You don't even need a like a special unit, like a Hibernate spec or a Mongo spec. You don't even need that anymore necessarily. It's super easy to get going. We have an improved mapping DSL that you can use for better code completion in IDEs. So the static mapping block. There's now you can statically import a class called Mapping Builder, and the IDE it uses @delegates2 in Groovy, so it knows how to complete all of the closures and the DSL and so forth. We also have Bean API validation API support, which if you prefer to use Bean validation API, which ties nicely into the fact that we've restored JPA annotation support. So if you prefer to use JPA annotations with Bean validation API annotations like @not null and @min, and for defining your validation constraints, you can do that now. But the big deal about GORM 6.1 is the new data services concept. Inside, I'm going to be demoing that in a minute. We have specific support for Hibernate for it. The @query and annotation, which allows you to define HQL queries, which have improved massively for in GORM 6.1, because we now apply automatic escaping to HQL and SQL queries that are passed as a G-string. So if you do book.find and you pass a JPA QL query or an HQL query, whatever you want to call it, it's a G-string, we will automatically, just like Groovy SQL does, introspect the G-string and transform it into into named parameters, so that you don't make your applications vulnerable to SQL injection attacks or JPA QL injection attacks. We've also added Hibernate specifically some new Hibernate AST transformations specifically for Hibernate, and these are very cool because they do things that under the covers that you may not be aware of, but will provide massive improvements. So, for example, Hibernate, when it does dirty checking, when you're doing you read an object, if the transaction is not read-only, Hibernate will dirty check your object to see if it's been updated and update it automatically. That's why some people get confused. But I'm only doing a get. I'm only doing a get, but my object is being updated. because if your transaction is not read-only, Hibernate will flush the session and perform dirty checking on your object. That's why it's good to mark your transactions as read-only for read operations. But anyway, we have a new transformation that transforms GORM entities so that we integrate with Hibernate's custom dirty checking support. So when you read an object, Hibernate asks us, is the object dirty? Ask GORM, is the object dirty? And we respond, yes it is, or no it isn't, based on our dirty checking implementation, which basically tracks the changes you make to your object. Yeah, so it's far more efficient rather than what Hibernate does, which is maintain a parallel array within the session and do a comparison of the array it keeps in the session of all your property values with the object's values, and then do a runtime comparison every time it needs to dirty check. Ours is just, is this object dirty? So it's far faster, and more efficient. With MongoDB, we have decimal 128 support, or the GORM data sources stuff, and for Neo4j, we have a new support for relationship entities. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of details. Those who did come to my talk on GORM yesterday, I talked a lot more about Neo4j. We're super excited about the Neo4j support, support for querying paths, relationships, and more. Support for cipher queries using @ciphering GORM data services, assigned identifiers, batch updates. There's really some big changes and important improvements for Neo4j. So I'm going to do a quick demo of the most significant feature of GORM 6.1, which is GORM data services. So I have a project here, which is just a test. It's just a unit test. And notice that in the test here, it extends specification, so it's just a normal Spock unit test. And I've got a shared field here that's marked with auto cleanup, and my Hibernate data store up there. And notice that I'm passing the package to it. So this line is all you need to do to set up GORM in a unit test. Yeah, it'll scan your packages. The fact that it's annotated with auto cleanup will ensure that it's shut down when the unit test completes. Yeah, that's a really nice feature of Spock. If your object implements closable, it'll automatically call close at the end of the spec. And we can annotate each test with @rollback, which is @rollback because it's now part of GORM. Is usable without Grails inside of your unit tests. And this means that I don't actually have Grails on my class path for this test. I just have GORM. And I'm defining a test here that that uses GORM specifically. And down here, I've got a few domain classes. So I've got a club. In this case, we're talking about football or soccer for the Americans in our audience. We've got a club that has a name and number of supporters. A club has one stadium, which has a name and a capacity. And you can see down here that I've got a club service that targets the club domain class. And you can see that within the body of this interface, it's an interface, I've got a number of different methods. What GORM Data Services does for you is it automatically implements this interface for you. Yeah? And it does it at compile time. Yeah? So there's no runtime proxies. There's no runtime startup cost because it's all done at compile time. Yeah? And because it's done at compile time, it's really smart. So if I run this test, for example, you'll notice that look how fast that executes. 427 milliseconds for one. So unit testing, your Hibernate logic. This is using Hibernate and in-memory database. There's hardly any reason to use a mock implementation now. But you can see that I haven't actually got an implementation, but these calls to my club service are working fine. And it's really smart because you'll notice, for example, I got a find method here. And it takes a name parameter, so it knows how to implement this because the name parameter matches the name property of the club. But if I were to misspell this, for example, I get a compilation error with the exact line and says no property exists on domain class club. So you get, not only is it not based on runtime proxies, because it's based on compile time, you have compile time checks. Yeah, so it will check the validity that your service is actually valid, and it's got some really nice features. For example, we have integration with the bean validation API, so you can say not blank. Yeah, so I can add an annotation on that. And then if I try and say club service, find club, and I pass in a blank string here, and I run that, I'm going to get a in theory. It's find. Sorry, I called the wrong method. That was stupid. There we go. There you go, you get a constraint violation exception that violates the parameter I passed into my service, violates the constraint. So that automatically, that validation part automatically gets implemented for you. And you can see also that there's an example here where I'm turning an RxJava observable. Yeah, so, and in this case, it'll automatically implement the logic for you that executes the method on the RxJava IO scheduler. So it'll automatically do the right thing. Also, it handles all of the transactions for you. You notice I haven't got @transactional on anywhere here, but it knows, because this method is a write operation. It knows that it's transactional, so it automatically applies transaction handling. It also knows that this find method is a read operation, so it automatically adds a read-only transaction. Yeah, so it smartly applies the correct transaction handling automatically for you. Now you can override that. I can add @transactional to any of these methods to override the defaults and do whatever I want, but it'll automatically apply the right thing. And then the other cool thing is the support for JPA-QL. So you can see here I've got an @query annotation here, and it's doing a JPA-QL select. Now, the nice thing about JPA-QL over traditional queries is that you can it's easier to do more SQL-y stuff, right? So you can do joins, you can do selects, you can do projections, you can use functions. But the downside is you open yourself up to injection attacks and so forth, and it's not as type safe. But with GORM data services, this eliminates both of those disadvantages. Because, why? Because you can see here that I'm using G-strings to define the types inside of my query. Yeah. So what does that mean? That means that if I try to select c.name and I misspell name, I'm going to get a compilation error on the exact line where I made a mistake in my query. Yeah, I get a compilation error. And that's the same thing applies. If you can see, I'm doing an init join on the stadium. If I were to misspell stadium when doing the join, I get a compilation error again. Well, I should get a compilation error again. So anyway, well, and if I were to do to misspell capacity on the stadium, I get the same. I get a compilation error on stadium because stadium doesn't have a capacity. And it knows as well that this is a read-only query, so it applies read-only transaction semantics. And you can see here that I'm returning from this, I'm returning a projection that's just returning the name and the capacity. So you can see that the two stadiums, I get just the club name and the capacity back. And I can also do optimized update operations. Yeah, so you can see I can say update club, set the supporters, where name, and it knows that this is an update query because it starts with update, so it applies a write transaction by default. So it's making all the right decisions for you, implementing the logic for you. And another cool feature of this, which I don't have time to demo, is this is an interface, but this can also be an abstract class. This can be an abstract class, and you can mix your own custom logic with logic implemented automatically for you. And if you make in an abstract class, if you make any of these methods protected, it doesn't apply transaction semantics. It only applies transaction semantics to your public methods, so that you can have within the body of your actual method call multiple protected methods that are, and then provides transaction semantics to the overall logic that applies to all of those methods. It's extremely powerful. And the other thing you can do is it integrates amazingly with multi-tenancy. So I can say at current tenant on this service, and every single method will validate that there's a current tenant present. And if there is, if you're using database per tenant or schema per tenant, it'll resolve the current tenant and apply the operation only to the current tenant. Or you can say, tenant blah, and it'll apply this service only to that particular tenant. Yeah? So immensely powerful stuff. And a whole talk by itself, I think. So anyway, moving on, since I'm running low on time. The other thing we have is the new event bus. So Reactor 2 is no longer being developed and maintained, so we needed to remove that. So we have a new event bus coming with support for various async frameworks from RxJava 1 and 2 to GParse to just plain executor service. Simple and easy to use, and it's got really nice GORM integration. So I'm going to do a quick demo of that. Let's see if I can get this thing rolling. So what we have here is a new project called, this is a Grails async on GitHub. And there's a number of sub-projects. We've got the Grails async project, and there's a new Grails events project, and then we have different implementations. So we've got Grails async GParse, RxJava, RxJava 2, Grails events, GParse, RxJava, RxJava 2. And then we have this transforms project, which is the cool part. So I have an example here where I have a sum service, and the sum service, forget the logic here, it's not really important, it just adds up two numbers. But the sum service is, as you can see, it's been annotated with @publisher, and it's transactional, okay? As it happens, the logic is not, but that's irrelevant. So it's a publisher and it's transactional. Then I have a total service. Over here, it's another service. You can see it's a subscriber, and it's got a number of different on-sum methods that, and this is completely not thread safe. It's just a trivial example that for demonstration purposes. But it basically takes the total and goes accumulating the total. If there's an alternative method that also receives the event, and one that receives a throwable. So if we run this application, and we go to /sum, you can see that the sum is 3 and the total is 3. Refresh, the total gets accumulated. And you can see that in my, no, not in that window. In my console here, my total service, the onSum method, is being triggered. And the cool thing about receiving the actual event is you can see that you get the event data. Actually, that should be event ID. We can get the event ID. We get the data from the event, which is 3, the total of the sum. And we get the parameters that were sent to the method that triggered the event. So basically, the new event bus system is taking this method, which is annotated with the @publisher, creating an event with the return value and the parameters, and notifying the event bus. And as it happens with this project, I have on my class path the RxJava implementation. So it's using completely asynchronous non-blocking, using a publish subject in the background based in event bus implementation. And so every time an event is fired, the event bus implementation notifies the RxJava publish subject, which then notifies all the subscribers. Completely asynchronous, non-blocking, and reactive. The other very cool thing about this is the significance of transactional. So if the transaction fails due to an exception, the event will not get triggered downstream. So the use case here is perfect for, imagine you create a user in your system, and when they sign up, you want to send them an email. Yeah. So you create a publisher, which is your service action that creates the user, and then you create a subscriber, which is to send the notification email. And if the user transaction commits, if the transaction actually commits, the notify works. Yeah, the notify goes off, publishes the event, the subscriber gets the event. You then know that a user has actually been created because the transaction has been committed. You fire off the email. Subscribers themselves can be transactional, so you can kind of simulate a little bit of, if this transaction commits, then go on to the next transaction types of behavior. Yeah. So it's very intelligent about applying the right transaction semantics to your subscribers and your publishers. Yeah, and it's doing it all through our AST transformations. There's no proxies. There's nothing special happening here. It's transforming your code and setting up the right structure to make this work seamlessly. And there's no references to any third-party frameworks. In this case, I'm using RxJava, but I can swap it out for GPARS. In GPARS, there's an actor event bus implementation that uses an actor and an event loop to build out the same thing, the same kind of logic process, but for GPARS. So you can swap out and use an implementation that makes sense for your. There's also a thread pool based, an executor service based implementation. So if you prefer to create your own fork join pool, your own thread executor service, configure your thread pool exactly to the specifications that you want for your application with a fixed size thread pool or caching thread pool or whatever it may be. But out of the box, it works. Yeah. By default, and then it's flexible enough so that you can go in there and configure the event bus exactly for the behavior that you want, and that's the idea behind this. So in Grails 3.3, Reactor 2 will be removed and deprecated, and this is the new way forward in terms of events in Grails 3.3. Okay, so future plans. We have a smaller footprint netty profile still in the works, still churning away in the background. We're going to have more microservices support, more profiles around that. The GORM data services concept is going to be extended to REST. We also have a lot of work to do around alignment for Spring 5, which is coming out at the end of the year, Boot 2, and also Java 9, which is coming up. All features that developers are going to be interested in using in the framework in the future. So that is it. I have time for this time. I have time for questions now. Fire away if anybody has.
Is 3.3 going to require Java 1.8?
No.
For sure. Okay.
No, but Grails 3.3 will be the last version of Grails to support Java 7. Any other questions? No? Goodness. I am being clear today. Yesterday I only had one as well. Yeah, go ahead. Yes. Can you use a trait? Is that I hadn't thought of that, but I don't see any technical reason why you couldn't use a trait. So
Traits and ASTs, they don't always play well.
Yeah, that's the only challenge I think. But I think it could be made possible. At the moment, the answer is no. But I'll have to play to see if I can get that to work. So at the moment, we support interfaces and abstract classes. I'll see if what we can do. I know that you will be able to define an abstract class that implements a trait. That would work. That would work fine. but I'm not sure if a service can actually be a trait. I'll have to check that out.
On that data service, where do you put it in the project? Does it go in the services? Does it go in?
Yeah, so in Grails, it's actually quite handy that Grails does nothing to interfaces and abstract classes at the moment. So you can put them in Grails app/services, your interfaces, and it works exactly the same. So Grails doesn't apply any special behavior to those. So GORM can independently function there. So they fit nicely into Grails app.services. Yep.
Will we be able to test this magical new service?
So yeah, I mean, didn't you not see that test that I'm running? This is the only line that you need to test. I'm defining my package, and you can see that over here I'm calling datastore.getService to get hold of a reference to the service, but the service itself is defined in my test. So I actually don't have. I mean, this whole thing is a unit test. This is just, there's nothing, it's just a unit test. So I'm using the service in my test here, and it just works. We're focusing, every feature we're building with GORM now is focused very much on how can we make this easy and efficient to unit test. And in fact, that's one of the nice features of the new transactional annotations. I've got another unit test here, which tests our new you can see over here I've got a transactional service, which is a class. And notice how that I'm newing up the transactional service, and I'm just using it. There's no throw exception. There isn't a transaction manager present. I can't find it. You don't need Spring. It just works in the unit test.
Okay.
So yeah.
You mentioned earlier that it was using an in-memory database. Is it an in-memory map, or is it H2?
No, it's an actual H2.
So it uses H2 by default. I don't see anywhere that you can specify a database.
We have sensible defaults. If H2 is on the class path and you don't have any other configuration, it just does the right thing. Yeah.
Neat.
So it doesn't. You don't need to configure anything. If you want, just to clarify that, I'll show you the dependencies I have in my class path. So this is all I have in my class path. I have GORM Hibernate 5. I have the GORM RX for the RX Java demo I gave you. That's optional. If you don't care about RX Java, you just remove this. At runtime, I have a runtime dependency on H2, and I have a runtime connection on a connection pool. That's all I have, and then Spock. That's all the dependencies I have. The connection pool is needed because otherwise it creates, if you use an in-memory database, it creates there's no pool, and then every time you access, it wipes your data. So the first time it works, creates the tables, but then the next time you access the database, it's disappeared. So you need the pool to to actually run the test. But other than that, it's four dependencies to get it working. Yeah. Okay. So is there any other questions, or are we good to go? Excellent. Thank you.